The cafe on the corner of Canal and Ninth had the kind of light that made everything slower and more honest. Morning streamed through tall windows in warm sheets, catching on suspended dust and the edges of ceramic mugs. Maurice had chosen the place because it felt like a room that would listen, not too loud, but not private, a public space that permitted intimacy. He arrived early, notebook tucked into his coat, eyes alert for the man who, years ago, had become known to millions as a face in Port Charles. Vincent Parise walked through the door a little later, hair slightly silver at the temples, a messenger bag slung across his shoulder, calm and present like someone who showed up on purpose. "Maurice," he said, and his voice split the quiet in the same way sun does, gentle, warming. They ordered coffee that was strong and bright, and then, without the theatrics of a formal sit-down, they slid into conversation. This piece is a moment the two of them made. An afternoon threaded through with art, yoga, the slow repair of mental health, and the luminous oddity of living in the public eye. It is not, strictly speaking, a biography. It is, maybe, what happens when someone you watched on television becomes someone you can really listen to. It is a conversation about what art gives us when everyone else has an opinion, what yoga asks of us when our nerves are frayed, and what real recovery looks like, messy, incremental, and oddly beautiful. Maurice, you walked into the room like you intended to be here. That's not always true of actors, some still carry the rush of arriving. What does presence mean to you? Jeffrey, presence is a muscle. When I was younger, I thought presence was being seen, big gestures, bigger emotions. But yoga and making art taught me presence is quieter, a steadying, like your breath in plank pose. It's showing up for the small things. It's the ability to be with what is happening without trying to edit it for an audience. Maurice, when did that shift begin? When did your crosshairs move from performance for others to practice for yourself? Jeffrey sipped his coffee and folded his hands around the cup as if cradling an idea. Jeffrey, I remember a moment, years back, after a day on set where everything felt like a series of boxes I had to tick. I could do the work, memorize lines, hit marks, but at night I felt thin, like I'd been playing a part of myself for a crowd and not lived at all. I started going to a small yoga class near my apartment. The teacher was patient, and she spoke rarely. One night she said, "When your body feels safe, your mind gets quieter." It was almost a throwaway line, but it landed. I started to see that my body wasn't just a vessel for performance, it was a container for my life. From there, curiosity. From curiosity, practice. Maurice, so the yoga led you to art, or the other way around? Jeffrey, they abraded. Yoga showed me how to listen to my edges, the places in the body that hold memory, grief, tightness. Art taught me how to translate that listening into language or color or movement. Painting, for me, is a rehearsal of attention. When I work on a canvas, I have to be present to line and hue and how they argue with each other. That's a kind of yoga for the mind. There's a discipline in both that's not punitive. It's an invitation to keep returning. He laughed quietly. Jeffrey, people assume creativity is a faucet, either on or off. That's not it. It's like a garden. You cultivate, you weed, sometimes nothing grows, sometimes you find a surprise tomato. Yoga taught me to be okay with seasons. Maurice, the garden metaphor keeps coming up these days. Maybe because it allows for patience. What do you make now? What mediums? Jeffrey, lately, it's been mixed media. I began with oils, there's something forgiving about oils, how you can scrub and glaze. Then texture moved me, plaster, fabric, charcoal, fragments of old newspapers. I like the idea of recovery literalized in the surface. You can see the scars on a canvas, you can see the collage of past lives. I've been working with pieces that start with a long underpainting, layers of wash and muted colors, then building, sometimes destroying, then stitching back. It's therapy, but it's also a conversation with time. Maurice, therapy is making. That's important. People often compartmentalize. This is for therapy, that's art. You're mixing them. Jeffrey, because they are the same. There's a misconception that therapy is about erasing pain. No, therapy is making room for pain to be witnessed and rearranged. Art gives the pain a shape. It's like turning static into a map. And then you can say, oh, that knot is here. You can breathe into it. He paused and pointed at a woman across the cafe who was smoothing the creases in a scarf with slow, deliberate fingers. Jeffrey, when we're in the public eye, everything becomes a performance. That's what's so tricky. People project onto you. They want to own the story. The discipline of yoga and the discipline of art are both ways of reclaiming authorship. Maurice, let's talk about mental health more directly. There's this scripted, glossy version of recovery that people drop on podcasts, gratitude journal, 3 steps to wellness, and then there's the messy reality. What have been your most important tools? Jeffrey breathed, as if preparing to give an honest list. Jeffrey, first, community. Not the curated community of followers or colleagues who clap at premieres, but the people who will show up when your head is heavy and your jokes stop working. A neighbor who texts, "Want to walk?" A yoga teacher who notices you've been quieter. You need people who will hold a room with you. Second, ritual. Not rigid rules, but anchors. For me, it's a morning sequence, 3 rounds of sun salutations, then 5 minutes of sitting, then coffee. It's small. It tells my nervous system, we're starting. Ritual is predictability when everything else is chaotic. Third, making. Doesn't matter what, doodling, kneading dough, layering paint. It's externalizing inner life. It keeps you from collapsing it inside. Fourth, therapy. Real therapy, where you do the work, that's been non-negotiable. People are sometimes afraid because they think therapy will unroot them. For me, therapy has been the place I learned how to tend to my edges without fear. Maurice, you mentioned community. I've watched you move through spaces, actor, artist, yoga teacher, and I'm curious how you choose the communities you belong to. You can't belong to everything. Jeffrey, you don't have to. Belonging is quality, not quantity. I choose communities by how they make me feel when I leave them. Light? Drained? Curious? Held? I try to stay in groups that make me feel more like myself. That's easier said than done. There's also the choice to belong in multiple smaller ways, teach a workshop here, show at a collective there. You're not choosing a tribe forever, you're choosing a moment to be present. Maurice, that's a freeing way to think about community. It allows for movement. Speaking of movement, what does your yoga practice look like now? You've taught classes before, how has your relationship to teaching changed? Jeffrey, teaching used to be about giving. Now it's about offering. As a young teacher I methodized everything, counts, cues, alignment, like a script. There's value in that. But over time I learned to surrender the script. Now, I enter class curious. How is this group breathing? Where are their shoulders? Are they carrying grief? Teaching has become an act of listening, offering sequences that meet people where they are, not where I think they should be. He folded his fingers as if illustrating a point. Jeffrey, and sometimes, a class is mostly about presence. You don't need the perfect vinyasa. You need the space for someone to notice their inhale. That's enough. Maurice, you bring your whole self into teaching, actor, maker, healer. Do you see your past public work, your years on television, as complicating your wellness, or as helping it? Jeffrey, both. Acting taught me tools, how to access emotion, how to tell story. It also taught me that sometimes applause can be a mask for loneliness. There were times acting fed the ego in ways that felt good short-term and hollow long-term. But I don't regret it. It gave me discipline and a sense of how to craft narrative. Those are useful in art and yoga. The complication comes when the outside applause starts to dictate your inside weather. That's when you need to rewire. Maurice, rewiring, explain that. Jeffrey, it's retraining the nervous system. For years, when I received praise, my worth spiked. When I didn't, it dropped. That volatility is exhausting. You have to retrain yourself so that your nervous system receives validation from internal resources, integrity, presence, craft, rather than external applause. Yoga is one rewiring practice. You feel your breath and the body responds. Art is another. You make something for the sake of making, not for likes. Therapy is yet another. You learn the thought patterns that keep you hooked. Maurice, there's also vulnerability in making a public show of practicing vulnerability. How do you balance being open about mental health with maintaining boundaries? There's a fine line. Jeffrey, yes. I am cautious. Vulnerability is a tool, not an offering to everyone. It's radical to be honest, but that honesty should be purposeful. When I share, I try to do it in ways that help others feel less alone, not to solicit attention. And setting boundaries is part of responsibility. I might discuss that I struggle with anxiety, but I won't unpack intimate therapy details in an interview. Some things are sacred. It's a balance between demystifying and protecting. Maurice, you've spoken about art as a container for grief. Can you tell me about a piece that felt like a turning point for you? Jeffrey smiled. and the smile carried the weight of memory. Jeffrey, there was a piece I made after a long winter, small, maybe 2 feet wide. I built it from discarded newspaper clippings, scraps of an old shirt, and a layer of blue underpaint that smelled like linseed oil and late nights. For months I kept scraping it back, like trying to excavate a buried self. One morning I woke and cut a square from the canvas and stitched in a patch of raw linen. It didn't match. It was awkward and beautiful. When I stepped back, I felt a release, like a loop I'd been running had been interrupted. That patch was a humility. It said, "You are mended, imperfectly. And that's enough." Maurice, imperfect mending, poetic. Do you hang your work publicly? Jeffrey, sometimes. I like showing with small galleries or community centers. There's something intimate about an audience of neighbors. I recently did an installation at a wellness center, a small room with soft lights, 3 sculptures, and a guided audio of breath. People would come and lie on mats and take 10 minutes. That response, people using art as medicine, felt like home. Maurice, art as medicine. There's a growing conversation around that, prescribing creativity, so to speak. How literal do you think that can be? Jeffrey, I think it's literal. The mechanism is simple. Humans are meaning-making machines. When you create, you order experience. You turn chaos into narrative. That's calming. Neurologically, making something engages the prefrontal cortex in ways that can regulate the limbic system, the part of our brain that feels panic. There's research around music therapy, art therapy. We're wired to correct. Even if the only result is a paper crane, the act recalibrates. Maurice, let's talk about failure. You've had successes and disappointments, everyone does. What do you think failure taught you that success couldn't? Jeffrey, failure is an unvarnished teacher. Success can be intoxicating. It seduces you into believing you're infallible. Failure brings humility. It forces you to examine your practice, to refine your craft. I remember a play I did where everything fell apart. Tech issues, poor rehearsals. At the end, I felt raw. But I learned resilience, how to be present when the world is messy. Failure taught me how to show up without the guarantee of applause. Maurice, you use the word show up a lot. It's the trope of modern wellness, but you make it feel specific. How do you apply showing up in a noisy, image-obsessed industry? Jeffrey, show up as a verb is a rebellion against performativity. In an industry that profits from image, showing up refers to the private acts, returning calls to friends, honoring agreements, doing the work rather than optimizing for buzz. It's mundane but radical. It's making a choice each day to prioritize integrity over optics. Maurice, from Port Charles to quiet studios, do you ever miss the stage and screen? Is there a hunger to return? Jeffrey, I miss parts of it. I miss the communal thrill of a live set, the humor, the crazy energy. But my appetite has changed. If I return, it would be on different terms, not because I need validation but because the project speaks to me. The work needs to align with my life. I think many artists find that their creative appetites mature. You want to do things that matter, not just more things. Maurice, you also teach. What's a lesson you try to give students that you wish someone had given you earlier? Jeffrey, I tell them to fall in love with the process, not the outcome. That's the cheesy thing everyone says, but it's true. I wish someone had told me that when I was hungry for success. Also, rest is part of the practice. There's valorization of hustle. We wear exhaustion like a medal. But rest is the soil where creativity grows. Maurice, rest is soil, nice. How do you tend your soil? Jeffrey, sleep, really. Boundaries around late-night work. Not answering emails on Sundays. Walking in the morning without headphones, paying attention to small things, light on leaves, the way people hold their coffee. I also cook. Cooking grounds me. It's a ritual that has immediate reward. You can taste how you're doing by what you feed yourself. Maurice, the self-care checklist, breath, sleep, home-cooked meals. You mentioned earlier that you're cautious about how much you share. Yet you clearly choose to speak in places like this. Why give these insights away? Jeffrey, because sharing matters. If one person reads a sentence and thinks, maybe I don't have to be perfect, that's worth it. There's a modesty in that. You're not trying to fix the world, just tilt it a degree. Also, vulnerability begets connection. It's how we build communities of care. Maurice, if you could give your younger actor self one letter of advice, what would it say? Jeffrey, it would say, Dear you, don't let applause steal your calendar. Keep making. Learn to sit with discomfort. Find people who will love you when you are small. Love your craft, not your image. And breathe. Short, but with plenty of white space for margins. Maurice, he'd probably fold it and keep it in his shoebox. On craft, what's a scene or a role that taught you more than others? Jeffrey, there was a role early on where the character was mostly internal, few lines, long silences. People underestimated the value of stillness back then. That role taught me to inhabit silence without filling it. It's a crucial lesson for both acting and life. Silence is communicative. You can do so much with restraint. Maurice, do you find your making practices inform one another, the way a painting colors an improvised monologue, or vice versa? Jeffrey, absolutely. I often start a painting with a small improvisational movement, dance, really, and film it on my phone. Then I'll move with the recorded movement as I work. Sometimes the brushstroke becomes a visual echo of a gesture. Story and surface inform one another. Movement lodges in the body, and the body remembers it. That's how memory moves between disciplines. Maurice, there's also the political dimension. Art and mental health aren't isolated from systems. How do you think the industry and society could better support artists' well-being? Jeffrey, structural changes would help. Healthcare that includes mental health, sane working hours, respect for time off. Industry-wise, it would be radical to normalize rest, to not expect young actors to be available at 2 a.m. for a table read. But beyond structures, we need cultural shifts, destigmatize therapy, provide affordable creative spaces, fund arts that aren't purely commercial. Artists do vital cultural labor. We should treat that labor as essential, not extracurricular. Maurice, practical and poetic. Before we wrap, what practices or recent projects are you excited about? Jeffrey, I'm teaching a short series at a community center combining simple yoga sequences with creative prompts, 10 minutes of movement, 20 minutes of making. The idea is to demystify both. Anyone can sit and draw, anyone can move with attention. We've had grandmothers and teenagers in the same room, and that cross-generational witnessing is remarkable. Also, I'm finishing a series of small canvases, habitats. Each one is like a tiny room with relics stitched into it, a button, a thread, a scrap of a map. They are about the places we live in inside ourselves. Maurice, habitats. I like that. It brings us back to your initial point. Presence is a muscle. We end where we began. Jeffrey, yes. And one more thing, compassion is practice too. We talk a lot about self-care as a checklist, but compassion requires repetition. We slip, we get angry at ourselves, we judge. But if we practice compassion like sun salutations, returning to it again and again, it changes the architecture of the day. Maurice, a closing request, one line for someone sitting with a heavy night, wondering if they can make it to morning. Jeffrey looked up as if seeing a single face in the crowd. Jeffrey, you don't have to fix it tonight. Just breathe, and remember there are more breaths to come. After they parted, Maurice sat with a conversation like one might sit with a painting in a gallery, taking in the layers, the underpainting, and the patches. Jeffrey walked away not as an icon from an old television frame but as a person who had learned to make a life out of repeated small acts, a morning sequence, a canvas scraped and rebuilt, a class that welcomed imperfect bodies. It felt, paradoxically, like a victory that didn't look like one. No shouts, no red carpets, just steady work at the edges of being. What does the story of an actor-turned-artist teacher tell us in a time of curated personas? Maybe that life is not the sum of headlines but the accumulation of tiny, honest gestures. Make art. Practice presence. Build rituals that anchor. Keep your people close. Fall in love with process. Rest. This is not a manifesto. It is a map, and the map is scribbled in ink and coffee stains because it was drawn in a cafe at midday. The markers are simple: breath, community, making, and the slow, stubborn work of tending one's inner garden. If there is a single through line in Jeffrey's story, it is that attention itself is salvific. Where attention goes, repair follows. In the weeks after the conversation, Maurice visited the wellness center where Jeffrey's installation was on view. He watched strangers lie on mats beneath soft lights and close their eyes. In the gallery's corner, a small canvas shone with a patched square of linen. The cohort that gathered, young, old, in varying states of weather, moved their attention like a gentle tide across the room. Someone laughed softly. A phone stayed in a pocket. A breath deepened. Jeffrey's last text that week was a single photo, a close-up of hands, his hands, covered in pigment, stitching a scrap of fabric into a canvas. The caption read, simply, mending. Under it, Maurice typed back the one line he had asked for earlier and then added, "You are not alone. There are kinds of rescue that arrive not in sirens but in the rendering of a single line, the patience of a teacher, the commitment to be present again tomorrow." In a world that asks for spectacle, Geoffrey had chosen a quieter path. That path, he told Maurice, had all the makings of a life.